Father, we thank you that we live at a time, Father, when we have a certain, not just any, but a word that addresses us at the point of our need. A word that clearly tells us that there is something that is always true, something always needed. And that is why you have a word for us. Because there are some things that we're always called to do. There are some tasks that are always before us. And there are certain things that are demanded of us. And if we looked at them, Father, in our own strength, we would truly be immobilized. But we have a word, Father, that addresses us at the point of our need, and it tells us, you have the strength to do this, because I'm with you. So help us, Father, as we look at this text this morning, to see what you're saying to us. And we'll be careful to give you praise, for it's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. That text that Adam read today is part of a much longer text that Jesus is reading to his disciples and to some other people that are with him just before he is going to be walking into the garden to be executed. And if we stop and we spend a little time, and I'm going to suggest you do this because I'm certainly not going to do it this morning, read the entire text, although sometimes I have the idea in sermons that maybe I shouldn't say anything at all. Maybe I should just get up and read what it says. Because this one is really disturbing. Because this is a long passage where he talks about something is coming. You like that sometimes you turn on the television and they tell you this show is coming. Of course, if it's not one of your shows, you don't care. But if it is one of yours, then you kind of get amped up for that. You know that certain things are on the calendar, like Labor Day or the 4th of July. And you begin planning for that because you know that it's coming. Okay? And for centuries, when we look at this text, there were people that had been given a word. They were told by God, I am going to do this. You are going to see it, and these are the signs. This is what you look for. And you would think, wouldn't you, that they would be prepared for this, that they would look at this and say, okay, how do we put this together? How do we prepare for this? But you know people. Because even if something is coming our way, sometimes, for some reason, we just don't do it. It's not because we're particularly dumb or something like that, but it's kind of inconvenient. I don't really want to think about this. In fact, I'll put it off as long as I possibly can so that when it really shows up, it will run right over me. And then I can have an excuse as long as I don't think about it. As long as I don't really have to think about it, but then that's the problem, isn't it? Because we do have to think about it. We do. It does have some way of addressing us. Because there are some things involved in having the mind of Christ and understanding what that says in Philippians 2, that there are certain ways that we're supposed to think. And by the way, it's not positive mental attitude. It's not asking us to reorient our thinking. It's asking us, as Paul says in the book of Romans, to have our thinking transformed so that we're not conformed to the spirit of the age that we live in. And I think if there's anything that describes the spirit of the age that we live in, it's the idea that, well, maybe I really don't have to deal with this today. And almost always, when we decide not to deal with it today, it's not based on rational thought. Because we really haven't thought about it at all, because it's disturbing. And that is what makes us, what's the word? Oh, afraid. Because when something's imminent, I am no longer able to ignore it anymore. It's staring me right in the face, and it says to me, I am coming for you. And that picture always engenders fear in people. And you and I live in a world that is dominated by fear. And there are people that want you to be afraid. In fact, they have an investment on making you afraid and keeping you afraid. In fact, they're so good at it that not only that, but they will tell you this is what you need to be afraid of. This is who you need to be afraid of. And by the way, I'm the only person that can fix it, so you need to listen to me, because they want you to be afraid of them and to trust them alone. Well, there's only one being in the entire universe that we really need to be afraid of. And that is this God who is actually coming. But even then, that's not the ultimate goal, because his ultimate goal is not to terrorize us. Because he's not some petty little dictator that has an inferiority complex, or he's too short, where he wants you to just simply tell him how wonderful he is. God is really not in that business. And there's something that happens all the way through the Bible that's going to lead us into this text. I wanted to make sure that I got it right this week, because I went through and I remember reading about Moses. And God calls him to go to Egypt. And of course, he's tremendously confident. No, you've read the text. He's not. He's afraid. And so what God does is he gives him a stick. He says, go. Don't be afraid. You've got me. That's all you need. We think of someone like Joshua. He had been with the people an entire time, throughout the entire wilderness, and he'd seen all the devastating mess that they created by being afraid and disobedient. So he's getting ready to walk into the land. What's the first thing God tells him? Are you ready? Don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous. He moves him all the way past a mentality that says you need to be afraid. You read about Gideon. I love that story because he's got thousands of guys he's ready to go into battle with. God says, no, you've got too many. You can hear Gideon. It's not in the text, but you can hear him because he does. They've got a bunch of people over there. This is not too many. God says it is. He pares it down to a couple of thousand. He says, it is still too many. About this time, Gideon is saying, you're really not paying attention. And so he gets it down to about 300. And if Gideon's like us, he's probably saying, well, we're going to go die. Yeah. But he says, remember the words? Don't be afraid. Those words that annoyingly come up in the Bible over and over again. Do not be afraid. We find it with the disciples. Okay? Jesus is telling them, don't be afraid. They're on the sea. They're about to die. He says, don't be afraid. He's getting ready to walk into a nest of hostility that will murder him. He says, don't be afraid. And then he comes back and he's in the room, and they see him there, and they all want to go somewhere else. He says, don't be afraid. And I can hear them talking because they are us. I don't know, being afraid right now sounds like a rational thing, because there are people that are really out to get us, and we can spend time this morning going through the list of everything we need to be afraid of. And by the time we're done with that, we're immobilized and we're terrorized, and we think that there's no way out of the mess we're in. There's a problem with it. The text. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at this. He's talking to them about what's going to happen. Look at Luke 21, verse 7. Teacher, they asked him, so when will these things be, and what will be the sign that these things are about to take place? And he said, I do not want you to be unaware. Watch out that you are not deceived. Rule number one. The world has an investment on making us afraid, so they lie to us. It's not really that bad. Things are not really going to work out the way you think they are. But then he goes on, because he's not quite done there. I mean, the picture's pretty despairing. When you hear wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. It's right there in the text. Don't be afraid. We need to be very clear about this, because sometimes we treat do not be afraid like it's a suggestion. Okay. Well, don't be afraid. Kind of like whistling in the dark. Don't be afraid. Be afraid. Do not be alarmed. Why? Because I'm telling you. Because I'm telling you not to be afraid, and there's a reason. He goes on. He talks about all these terrifying things that are going on, signs and wonders from heaven. All these stuff is going to take them. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense ahead of time. Now, wait a minute. We're supposed to prepare beforehand. He says, there is something you cannot prepare for. Well, we're already running for the exits now. He says, I don't want you to prepare your defense ahead of time, because something is going to happen that you are not anticipating that is going to make it possible for you to stand. Therefore, you know by now, don't you? Don't be afraid. Don't be alarmed. And that just goes through all of Scripture. But then it really gets really difficult. Because in 3 Gospels, it's possible to think that this warning is a little vague. Well, in Luke, it's not vague at all. It is very articulate. Verse 20, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that its desolation has come near. You are going to see, not the second coming. You're not going to see this with Israel and the Jews or anything else there. You are going to see this in your lifetime. So you're not looking 2,000 years in the future. You're looking at now. You will see this. So if I'm going to see it, I need to know that I'm not just kind of a bug on the windshield, kind of an afterthought of God that may or may not work out. He's warning them so that they will know. Because you see, the other thing that destabilizes you is just simply ignorance. Well, you didn't really tell us. So Jesus is going to tell, yes, I really did. I really told you that this is coming. And by the way, it's time. It's not going to be out in the indefinite future somewhere. It's going to be in your lifetime. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that its desolation has come near. You need to go, because what's happening there is going to be worse than you can possibly imagine. Verse 22, these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all the things that were written. Woe to anyone that is there. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles, and the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, if you're a really good Jew, if you've really read all the prophecies that come before this is literally a slap in your face, because what it tells you is that you really haven't paid attention to the prophecies. Because he never promises the nation, I'm sort of kind of going to keep my promise to you regardless of your behavior. You can be as wicked as you want to. You can be as godless as you want to. But somehow, I'm just going to show up and magically make everything work out. He has warned them through the prophets over and over again. Things are different. I expect you to be different. I expect you to change. I expect you to seek something more than your own self-interest or your own national interest or your own personal interest. Because something bigger is going on here. Something that I want to get into your mind and make you understand. Because the Word of God always comes as this. It always comes as a call. It is an announcement that something is happening, and we need to stop and pay attention to it, because if we're not prepared, if we're not paying attention, then we're going to be afraid. And if we are afraid in those circumstances, there is no cure that we can think of. There's no way of looking at it and saying, number one, it's not really that bad, or this could not possibly be what God intended. He's really not going to do this to us, so we don't have to worry, because our worry is based on what we can do. But the warning is not about what we do. The warning is about what God will do. It's also a warning that wrath is real, that it is coming, and that if we persist in behaving the ways we are, this wrath will overcome us. In this context, this wrath will overcome us, and we will see these events coming after us, and there will be no remedy. There will be no way to fix it, because there is no power in the universe that can stop this. We don't have enough guns. We don't have enough bombs. We don't have anything that we can do that's going to stand in the way of what's coming, because it's coming because of us. It's not an accident. And it's not sort of an unintended thing. We've invited it. Take the time to read all four Gospels' description of the execution of Jesus Christ. And this is what you'll find. They intended to do it. It didn't just kind of work out. They got together in rooms and they said, we are going to do this. How do we get it done? How do we maximize its potential? And how do we make sure that when we do it, everybody agrees with us that this is the thing that needed to be done? So that when it happens, everybody will just simply stand up and say, yes, you've done the right thing. Now, I know, and you know, that's what they did, because that is what happened. They took Jesus into the council. They had planned and prepared to do this. So when Jesus comes out, he's already convicted. They took him to Pilate. And they said, we have convicted him, and we expect you to carry out the sentence. And by the way, we're going to make you too afraid not to do it. And so Pilate's already destabilized on this. He's looking at this, and he has an investment in this too, because he's afraid that the Romans that rule over him are going to show up. They're going to show up and say, you really haven't done your job. So their whole thing was based on fear. Pilate's entire thing was based on fear. The mob was out there. They had been manipulated by fear. And so when they see a cure that is within their power, they decide to execute. Why? Because they can. Because they've all been manipulated. They've all been pushed in a corner, and when you push people into a corner, you can expect they're going to respond badly. That's the call. That's the warning. He's telling his disciples, do not give in to this. Do not expect that this is the end. This is not the final word. So the call and the warning all come together in one thing. Now that brings us to our text this morning. Verse 25. Then there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. There will be anguish on the earth among peoples, bewildered by the roaring seas and waves. People will faint from fear and expectation of the things that are coming on the world, because the celestial power will be shaken. It doesn't get any worse. Everything seems to be moving in the direction of entire and total destruction and dissolution. By the way, if we just sort of sit around and say, well, I guess it'll work out, or I hope it'll work out, or maybe it'll work out, or it could work out, or I'm going to look at this in the best possible, because there's really good news in this. Well, if it's based on us, there's no good news. We can't fix it. We can't stop this. It's going to roll right over us, and God intends for it to roll right over us. But the good news is actually the wrath, because it's His creation. He's not going to leave us there. The reason it's coming is because finally, maybe, or certainly, we'll turn to Him and say, finally, it's at the end of what we can do. Because it says this: when these things begin to take place, the sun, moon, and stars, the anguish, the misery, when these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is at hand. It doesn't tell them, I want you to be afraid because you've worked yourself into some special firm. He doesn't say it. I don't want you to be afraid because you have the ability to cope with this. I don't want you to be afraid because you have a good beat on this. I want you not to be afraid because I am coming. And it's the only good news that we can ever say to ourselves. It's the only good news that we can ever say to the world we live in. It's the only good news that coming soon, the God who created this world, the God who loves this world, the God who is intending to save this world is coming, and we are going to see in Him everything He always said He would ever do. There's a creation He decided to save, not because we wanted it, but because He wanted it. There are people He intends to save because He wants it. There are things He's going to do because He's going to do them. There are things that are going to be accomplished because He wants to do them. And so the reason that He tells us not to be afraid is because He's the one that's going to bring about the entire things that we're looking at. Sometimes we wonder, well, what's our place in this? Well, in this context, this is our place in it, and that is to just simply stop being afraid. Stop looking at the world and the age you're living in and to think that somehow those powers are more important than the power of God. That somehow the gospel, well, I know the gospel deals with this, the gospel deals with that, but somehow every time I hear that phrase and every time you hear that phrase, you should stop and say, okay, there is nothing outside the purview and the transforming power of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it is the only answer that will settle all the things we're looking at every day. You're going to say, well, I could launch off into another sermon right here and talk about all the things that we're looking at, maybe in China or the Pacific Rim or Africa. Well, that's a little too big. I mean, that's true. I would argue He's going to do that, but I could talk about the United States of America. That's really a little bit too big, because most of us have never been to New York City. In fact, New York City is kind of a myth in our minds. We imagine it's there. Let's drag it all the way down to just Salem, Illinois. Are there things happening in Salem that are disturbing? Just say yes, shake your head. Because they are. Are there things happening in the lives of people that you know that really bother you? Because you know that they're destructive. And you know that if they persist in this, in the end, it will be really bad. There's a cure for that. And it's hard sometimes to believe because it's beyond us. We have to trust someone else. But that annoying voice that we hear about not trusting is not really the voice of the age we're listening to. It's really our voice we're listening to. Because we're like the disciples in Luke 21, we're afraid. sometimes fear is rational. When we're looking at things that are out there and we're afraid of them, we should be. And I don't think Jesus was saying here, your fear is irrational. He said your fear is misplaced. Because the things you're looking at are not what you should be afraid of. You should be afraid that you're not paying attention and seeing what God actually wants you to see. I want you to be looking at me. I want you to be looking at my will in your life. I want you to be looking at what I can do for you, rather than what we can do for ourselves. We don't have the ability to get all this stuff done. He does. So he's calling us to himself. The gospel is never about us. It's always about God. But when it is about God, it is finally about us. Because we were created for him. And he's simply not going to give up or walk away. He has that annoying habit of always beating on the door and saying, today, I'm here. And if we hear that knock on the door and we're afraid, the problem is not him, the problem is us. And we probably just need to stop and say, do I have good reason to be afraid? And there's always one answer to that question, and that is no. It is not in the purview of Christians. I want to be clear about this because the scripture is clear about it. It is never in the purview of Christians to ever be afraid. If we are, we need to ask ourselves, what am I afraid of and why am I afraid of it? What power does it have over me? Because I'm pretty sure that a resurrection is the ultimate answer to the power of the world. It failed. It's defeated every single time. So here it is. Don't be afraid. And this sermon can sound insensitive. Like I'm really not paying attention. Because when the powers of fear are so loud and they're so explosive and you cannot really avoid them, after a while, the noise just overwhelms you. Because it's the only voice you hear. And God very often is not shouting at the top of his lungs. Very often the gospel is almost a form of persuasion. Like, you have to stop and listen to what he's saying. In this text we're looking at, I don't think Jesus is involved in histrionics. I don't think he's jumping up and down, shouting his disciples. Like I'm tempted. I think it's just one of these things that's very measured, very structured, very clear. I don't want you to be deceived. I don't want you to be afraid. I want everything to be clear. You are going to see this, and you are going to be afraid. But I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to choose faith over fear. I want you to choose gospel over the fear you see every day. I want you to choose me over every other thing that drives and dominates your life. I want you to choose to trust me. In the noise you hear every single day. Because when these things begin to take place, all these disturbing things, all these fearful things, all these things that are threatening our world, all these things that seem to be saying this is all going to end badly, they are always lies. Because my word is the last word that you will always hear. And that word contains one phrase, do not be. We're surrounded on every side by people that have an investment in wanting you to be free. The reason they do that is because they want to dominate and control you. there's only one person that legitimately deserves our devotion, that can be trusted to do the right thing for us all the time. He's revealed himself to us in a gospel in which he says, I will be there for you. I will look after you. I will take care of you. Even when things look really bad, he still says the same. So here this morning, you're not a Christian. He's calling you to come to him so that he will stop being bad. If we're Christians, and we understand the seductive nature of the fear that surrounds us all the time, you know what he's saying? Don't be afraid. You think, well, Virgil, you're kind of wearing this out? I can't wear it out. Because it's so dominant in the thoughts of everybody that I see. So let's think about that and respond as we stand in this.